Welcome to the debate. Today is Monday, February 23rd, 2026, and I want to start with a number that frankly frames our entire reality right now. If you are a mid-career professional, let's say 42 years old, and you are currently unemployed, the data suggests you have submitted 43 applications in the last 30 days. The resulting interview rate, it is statistically zero. We are not discussing a bad quarter here. We are discussing the structural failure of the labor market mechanism itself.
That is it's a very bleak opening, even for us, but it accurately sets the table for what we are dissecting today. We are looking at a recent intelligence briefing from Ty Venn. It's titled, Laid Off at 40 in 2026? Stop Sending Resumes. And while the title sounds a bit like clickbait, the actual content reads like a survivalist manifesto for the modern white-collar worker.
Because it is a survival manifesto. Look, Venn's central thesis is derived purely from first principles thinking. He argues that the resume, that static document listing your past titles, is essentially an artifact of a demolished economic era. He points out that the school system is a 100-year-old factory design meant to produce compliant workers, and the resume was just the tracking document for that factory. For the mid-career worker today, the job search is a dead mechanism, and his conclusion is that the only survival strategies left are upgrading your cognitive operating system via AI or engaging in radical geographic arbitrage.
Right, and I've read the briefing closely. And while I appreciate the cold objectivity of the analysis, I am here to represent the reality on the ground. Venn's diagnosis of the problem is surgically precise. I will give him that. But his prescriptions, they require a level of risk, what he literally terms guts, and a level of capital that I believe is simply out of reach for the structural majority. He is effectively telling a laid-off father of 3 to become a high-tech consultant or move his family to Vietnam. That feels less like a universal strategy and more like survivor bias.
I disagree with that characterization. I think what you call risk is actually just the new baseline requirement for survival. The perceived safety of the corporate job is an actual illusion here, but before we get to the solutions, we have to agree on the scale of the problem. We need to look at the data from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report from January 2025.
Yes, the report everyone loves to cite right now. 170 million new jobs created by 2030 versus 92 million displaced. On paper, that is a net positive of 78 million jobs. The economic optimists cling to that number.
But the optimists are not looking at the texture of the data. That report reveals a 22% structural churn. That means nearly a quarter of all formal employment is being turned over. The jobs being created, these AI workflow architects, renewable energy technicians, elder care specialists, are not the jobs being destroyed. We are seeing the real-time aggressive application of creative destruction.
You're referencing the 2025 Nobel laureates here, Mokir, Aghion, and Howick.
I am, yes. They formalize the mathematics of this exact phenomenon. Innovation-driven growth absolutely requires the destruction of old structures. Their work, combined with Vann's synthesis, suggests we are currently operating in a dead zone. Historically, there is a 10 to 15-year transition gap between a massive technological disruption and the stabilization of new employment structures. Venn places the specific gap between 2023 and 2038.
So we are in year 3 of a 15-year restructuring phase.
Exactly. We are right in the crater. If you are sending a resume today for a middle management role that operated exactly as it did in 2019, you are, to quote Venn directly, checking the train schedule at a demolished station. The train isn't late. The station is just gone.
I want to drill down on that specific point because the station is gone is a terrifying metaphor for people to absorb. I will acknowledge that frictional unemployment, which is just that temporary gap between jobs, has morphed into structural unemployment for many, where the role itself is completely erased. But is the resume truly zero ROI? Even Venn admits in the text, he asks, is sending resumes really completely useless? And he answers, not completely.
He says that to be charitable. The underlying math says otherwise.
But wait, for specific sectors, nurses, cybersecurity specialists, skilled trades, the resume still functions perfectly well. The labor shortage in those areas is acute and real.
Agreed. If you are in a trade where physical presence and strict certification are legally mandated, the resume functions. But the target audience for this briefing, and frankly the majority of our listener base, are knowledge workers. They are marketing directors, operations managers, creative leads. For them, the resume is a broken feedback loop, primarily due to the ghost listing phenomenon.
Right. And we need to define that term clearly because it sounds like a paranoid conspiracy theory to the uninitiated, but it is actually just standard corporate strategy in 2026.
It is pure data strategy. A ghost listing is a job post created with zero intention of hiring an external candidate. Companies are doing this for three primary reasons. One is data harvesting. They want to know the current market clearing rate for a specific skill set, and it's cheaper to post a fake job than to pay a consulting firm for that research. Two is compliance. They already have an internal candidate selected, but HR policies require them to post the role publicly for 2 weeks anyway.
And the third reason is the stock price.
Precisely. If a publicly traded company stops posting jobs, the algorithms interpret that as stagnation and the stock takes a hit. So they post jobs just to signal growth to the market, even if they are actively under a hiring freeze.
So the applicant is essentially providing free market research and algorithmic cover to a company that is, for all intents and purposes, gaslighting them.
Correct. And even if the job happens to be real, you aren't applying to a human being. You're applying to an AI-driven applicant tracking system, an ATS. These systems are currently filtering out roughly 75% of applicants before a human eye ever scans the page. It is a digital wall. And this creates a profound sense of learned helplessness. Venn draws a really sharp parallel here to Google search statistics. 58% of Google searches now end without a click.
The zero-click phenomenon.
Right. The user gets the synthesized answer from the AI at the top of the page and leaves. The website that actually generated the original content gets nothing. In the labor market, the applicant is the website. You feed your data, your entire professional history, into the system consumes it to train its own models or fulfill a metric, and you get absolutely nothing in return.
Okay, I concede the diagnosis. The old spray and pray method of sending PDFs into the void is definitively dead for the knowledge worker. But this brings us to the prescription, which is where my deep reservations lie. Venn proposes two paths. Let's start with path one, the brain currency. This is what he calls upgrading your cognitive operating system.
Yes, and this is the only logical way to escape the commodity trap. Venn argues you must stop identifying as an employee. An employee is a passive, dependent role. You have to start identifying as a builder. The methodology is cold but effective. You audit your domain expertise, and then you layer on a very specific stack of AI tools to build a deliverable product.
He gets extremely specific on the tools, which I do appreciate from a practical standpoint. He lists Claude, Midjourney, NN.N, and Pandas.
And we should explain these briefly, because a lot of people hear AI tools and their mind immediately goes to ChatGPT writing a generic cover letter. That is not what Venn is talking about here. He is talking about building an automated infrastructure.
Right. So Claude. This isn't just a basic chatbot. Venn describes it more as a reasoning engine.
Think of Claude as an infinite intern with an IQ of 120. It doesn't just write text. It can reason through complex logic puzzles. It can analyze legal contracts or structure a high-level strategic argument. You use it for the kernel of your work, the deep thinking.
Then you have Midjourney.
That is your visual department. Instead of waiting 2 weeks and paying $5,000 for a graphic designer to mock up a concept, you generate high-fidelity visuals in seconds. It allows a single person to present work that looks like it was produced by a mid-sized agency.
Now, NATN. This is the one that trips a lot of people up because it sounds highly technical.
It is technical, but it's highly accessible if you apply yourself. NATN is a workflow automation tool. Think of it as the digital plumbing or the middleware. It allows you to connect different pieces of software, like your email client, a database, and a payment processor, Without writing complex code, it literally turns a static idea into a functioning machine,
And finally, pandas.
which is a Python library for data analysis. Basically, it's Excel on steroids. It allows you to ingest and analyze millions of rows of data to find patterns and insights that a human brain simply cannot process.
Okay, so you have the stack, you have the tools. But Venn makes a critical distinction in his briefing that we cannot ignore. He states AI tools are extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily stupid.
And that is the absolute punchline of his entire framework. These tools generate output at superhuman speed, but they completely lack judgment. They have no taste. They have no real-world context. They require a human handler. The example Venn uses is the former creative director. In the old economy, she managed a team of 20 people. In 2026, she is an AI-assisted brand studio of one. She uses her taste, her 20 years of hard-won domain experience, to direct the AI. She doesn't go out and ask for a job. She sells a completed brand package as a standalone product.
That sounds incredibly empowering in theory. It fits that whole sovereign individual narrative perfectly. But let's look at the actual economics of that situation. If every laid-off marketing director reads this intelligence briefing and spins up a brand studio of one using the exact same stack, Claude, Midjourney, NNN, what happens to the market?
The market becomes highly efficient.
No, the market crashes. It leads to the rapid commoditization of expertise. If everyone has access to the exact same super tools, the price of the output races to the bottom. And Venn himself warns about the shadow of this path, the fake expert. If you skip the domain audit, if you don't actually know why a branding strategy works and you just know how to type a prompt into Midjourney, you are selling a hollow, useless product.
But that is exactly why the domain expertise is the moat. The market will very quickly distinguish between the person who understands the first principles of brand strategy and the person who just generated a pretty high-resolution image. The amateur becomes a cheap commodity. The expert becomes a premium, highly paid service.
Maybe in the long run, sure. But in the short run, you are asking someone who just lost their paycheck to spend 3 to 6 months learning Python libraries and workflow automation, generating zero income during that period, just to launch a business in a saturated market? That is a massive, frankly unreasonable ask. And Venn actually touches on this when he talks about why saving $5 lowers your IQ.
Yes, the concept of mispricing cognitive bandwidth.
Right. He argues that trying to save money by doing menial tasks yourself rather than paying for API access or software subscriptions destroys your ability to do high-level strategic thinking. But he expects these laid-off workers to just absorb those software costs while they have no income. The financial runway assumption is his biggest blind spot. He assumes a level of liquidity that most Americans simply do not possess.
It is a massive ask, I won't deny that, but you have to compare it to the alternative. Is it really better to spend those same 6 months sending resumes into a black hole, slowly draining your 401k, and completely eroding your mental health? At least with Path 1, you maintain agency. You are building momentum. You are upgrading your cognitive operating system. Even if that specific solo business fails, you are now an operator who knows how to wield these tools. You are no longer structurally obsolete.
Agency is valuable. I agree with that. But agency does not pay the mortgage in month 1.
Which is precisely why he offers Path 2. If you cannot compete on brain capital because you lack the time or the runway to upskill, you must compete on guts. You leverage geographic arbitrage.
The move to Vietnam strategy?
It is much more sophisticated than just moving. It is about the ruthless application of asymmetric value. Venn argues that knowledge considered outdated or commoditized in a hyper-competitive market like San Francisco, London, or New York is often viewed as cutting-edge innovation in developing markets like Kenya, Colombia, or Vietnam.
So you take your mid-level Western corporate skills to a market where they are artificially scarce.
Exactly. It is a simple supply-demand equation. And simultaneously, you arbitrage the cost of living.
A professional living on $50,000 a year in Kuala Lumpur has the purchasing power parity's equivalent to earning $120,000 in a major U.S. city. You radically lower your burn rate, so you don't actually need that high-salary corporate job anymore. You can operate as a part-time consultant at a lower rate and still live exceptionally well.
The math works. I've seen the charts. I do not dispute the financial arbitrage. What I strongly dispute is the human cost of this strategy.
What human cost? It's a strategic relocation.
The cost of severing your roots. Venn calls the necessary currency here guts. And he's right, it takes guts. But he is clearly writing this for the unencumbered. If you are 25 and single, sure, move to Nairobi, go be a digital nomad. But if you are 42, you have a partner who has a local career, you have kids entrenched in a school system, you might have elderly parents who require your care, you have a mortgage on a house that might be underwater. You cannot just pick up and move to where the macroeconomic opportunity is.
People have done exactly that for centuries. The entire history of human development is the history of migration toward economic opportunity.
Yes, but immigrants usually move out of absolute desperation, often having to leave their families behind for years. Is that what we are genuinely suggesting for the American middle class in 2026? That they must fracture their families geographically just to remain employed?
I am saying that if the objective choice is between fracturing your family geographically or losing your home entirely because you cannot secure work in your current zip code, the choice is effectively made for you. It is cold, but it is reality.
It is incredibly cold. And there is a cultural risk that Venn mentions too, which is vital. He warns specifically against Western condescension.
Yes, the savior complex.
Right. You cannot just parachute into a developing market, operating under the assumption that you are there to save the locals with your superior Western business wisdom. You have to be deeply humble. You have to integrate into their systems. If you go in with arrogance, the market will reject you and you will fail.
I think we can agree that intellectual humility is a prerequisite for surviving any of these paths. But I want to pivot and address the one counter-argument we hear constantly from the optimist, the demographic paradox.
Ah, the labor scarcity comfort blanket.
Exactly. The logic usually goes like this. The boomers are retiring, the global birth rate is crashing. We are fundamentally running out of working-age people. Therefore, companies will eventually have no choice but to hire older, mid-career workers.
And to be fair, the macroeconomic data supports the first half of that premise. The Congressional Budget Office's 2026 projections show that U.S. fertility rates have been below replacement levels for 20 years now. Deaths will exceed births by 2031. The prime working age population is flatlining.
But Venn dismantles this hope ruthlessly. The macro trend of population decline operates on a 20-year horizon. Your mortgage operates on a 30-day horizon. It is a fatal timing mismatch. But more importantly, it is a skills mismatch.
Right, because the jobs that are sitting empty are not the jobs we are losing.
Correct. We have a severe shortage of nurses. We have a shortage of elder care specialists. We have a shortage of skilled physical tradespeople. We do not have a shortage of mid-level marketing managers or SaaS sales directors. A 42-year-old software sales rep cannot just magically become a trauma nurse tomorrow just because the demographic charts say we need more nurses.
So waiting around for the labor market to come to its senses because of a supposed labor shortage is a fatal error in strategy.
It is practically suicidal. The market is not going to save you. It will automate your function, or it will hire 2 junior operators in Manila for the price of one of you, or it will simply learn to do without that function entirely.
So let's summarize where we are. We have logically dismantled the resume. We've acknowledged that upgrading your cognitive OS is a high-risk, capital-intensive endeavor, and we've acknowledged that moving across the world is logistically impossible for a vast number of families. Where does that actually leave the listener?
It leaves them with a stark binary choice. You can choose to stay in the dead zone, sending PDFs into an algorithmic black hole, praying for the 2019 economy to magically return. Or you can accept that the era of employment is definitively over and the era of capability has begun.
I do want to throw a lifeline to those who are understandably feeling a sense of panic right now. Venn does outline a third option,
almost as a footnote in the briefing, but I think it's critical. The apprenticeship model, or what he refers to as the shadow partner.
Explain the mechanics of that.
It serves as the bridge. If you are completely overwhelmed by the technical demands of Path 1, and Path 2 is geographically impossible, you find someone who is 3 to 5 years ahead of you on Path 1, someone who has already successfully built the AI-assisted studio or the automated consultancy, and you go work for them.
You effectively become their operator.
Exactly. Maybe you do it for cheap. Maybe you even do it for free initially. You trade your manual labor and your time for direct access to their cognitive OS blueprint. You learn the new trade by actually doing it in a live environment, rather than trying to build it from scratch in a vacuum while your savings bleed out.
That is a highly valid bridge strategy, but let's be brutally clear about what that requires psychologically. It requires swallowing your ego. It requires admitting that your previous impressive title, Vice President of Operations, means absolutely nothing in this new economy, and your actual ability to learn NNN and prompt Claude means everything.
And that is the hardest shift of all. It's not just an economic transition, it's an identity crisis. We are essentially asking professionals to kill their old corporate selves in order to survive.
Which brings us right back to the source material. Ty Venn frames his ongoing advisory, the Weekly Signal, and the Shadow Partner Program not as traditional career products, but as ongoing intelligence briefings. And I think, given the data, that is the only appropriate framing.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because if you are navigating a war zone, you don't need a career counselor. You don't need a cheerleader telling you your resume looks great. You need a tactical map. You need someone to tell you where the systemic mines are buried, and you need to know exactly which bridges are out.
Just be careful that in burning the boats, as Venn so eagerly suggests, you don't drown before you ever reach the other shore. The water is deep and the current is much stronger than most people realize.
That is true. But you must remember, the alternative is slowly starving on the beach. The boats are not coming back. You have to actively build what comes next.
A very sobering, cold reality for 2026.
Indeed. Thank you for listening to The Debate.